Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
and me, Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
Our guest today is Karen Smythe. Karen Smythe's previous books include the novel This Side of Sad, the story collection Stubborn Bones, and the critical study Figuring Grief, Gallant, Munro, and the Poetics of Elegy. Her family background is Norwegian and German Irish. She lives with her husband in Guelph, Ontario. Her newest release is the novel A Town with No Noise, published by Windsor's Palimpsest Press. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. So, what engaged you about getting started writing prose?
Ooh, I think I've always been a writer. When I was a little kid, I remember trying to think of things to write about. I wanted to write books and I wanted to have ideas all the time. And I did write poetry when I was 10 years old, 12 years old. Published my first poem in the Don Mills Mirror, our community newspaper. And then I went into studies in biology in university, but I knew that wasn't the path for me. I really wanted to study literature, and I just made a huge turnaround in my studies and my career and switched over to studying literature. And I was always surprised that people who study literature, not everybody wanted to write as well. People were interested in studying and becoming scholars, but I did follow that path for a while and became an assistant professor of Canadian literature, but teaching wasn't for me. And I just decided that was it. I was going to hunker down and do what I wanted to do all along, which was write. So I started writing short stories originally, and my career took me away from writing for a number of years. But when I got back to it, I decided that a novel was what was in me at the time, and that's when I wrote This Side of Sad. In 2017, that one came out. Yeah, so it's been novels ever since. This is my second novel, and I'm working on my third now.
As you mentioned in your acknowledgments, your background feeds this story about generational trauma among families with a poignant richness. What made you want to write something so personal at this point?
Well, I didn't plan on it, and I didn't plan on my novel turning into what it is, which is a focus on, as you say, intergenerational trauma and also the Holocaust, in Norway in particular. I started out wanting to write a novel with a lot of different complex characters and intergenerational issues for the families that I wanted to develop as characters. And the setting was going to be this small town that had started out in an agricultural vein and was transforming and transitioning to become a touristy destination. And all the complex characters and family stories started to develop. And then my focus on one of those characters, whose name is Otto in the book, he's the grandfather of my protagonist's boyfriend. He is a German immigrant to Canada who had been in the war, in the Second World War, when he was in Germany as a young man. And as I started to do research into this character and actual stories about people such as my character Otto coming to Canada from Germany after the war, I started reading about one person in particular who had immigrated to Kitchener and become a successful businessman. And the story I was developing about Otto and the questions my protagonist Sam has about her boyfriend's family and what they had been doing in Germany during the Second World War started to kind of develop into this World War II focus. My protagonist, her name is Sam. She's the narrator, and she ties the book together. So she's from a Norwegian family background. And her interest in her boyfriend's family then kind of pivots into an interest in her own family background and what had happened in Norway during World War II. So yes, I do have a Norwegian family background and part German as well. But the characters in this novel are invented characters, so it's not autofiction in any way. And what happens in part 2 in the novel, which really focuses on the Holocaust in Norway, is based on a lot of research and stories and testimonies that I've read about people's experience of the war in occupied Norway. But there isn't a personal family tie to that. My grandparents had left Norway before the war. They arrived in 1930 in Canada. And so I heard a few stories about the war and my grandparents' siblings when I was growing up, from my grandparents and my mom. And I knew one of my mom's uncles had been in a concentration camp in Norway as a political prisoner. But that's the only tie to my personal background. But what really drove me to do all this research and find out more than I'd ever known was almost an embarrassment that I didn't know anything about what had happened in Norway during the Second World War. It wasn't really anything the family had talked about, and my mom's relatives didn't talk about it either. So it's kind of a lack of knowledge, I guess, that really drove me to develop that part of the novel in the way that I did. And then the character Sam ties both parts together. So the first part of the novel focuses on this town in southern Ontario, and then the second part of the book focuses more on the small town in Norway, and both of those towns are fictional.
So, Sam, your main character, is also a writer developing her writing. How much of your own experience as a creator did you bring to this character?
Well, interesting question. Sam is much younger than I am, and her path in becoming a writer, an aspiring writer, is very different than my own. So in the novel, Sam has a degree in sociology from university, and she's working as a barista in a cafe in Toronto. When she is given this opportunity to write an article about the small town Upton Bay, the fictional southern Ontario town, one of her friends who is a journalist has too much work, and he asks her, knowing that she has some writing skills, if she'd be interested in taking this assignment to write a tourist article or an article about tourism in this town to help him out. So this is her first entree into the world of writing. And her interest in it develops in a different direction than journalism. But she does take that opportunity to become interested in issues about social justice. So her interest isn't really in tourism, and that's a bit of a conflict for the friend that hires her to do this article. But she learns a lot of things about the town, a lot of secrets about what goes on in the vineyards and how the wineries are operated in the area. And then she starts having conversations with her boyfriend's family, Otto, and his wife, Shelley, and starts thinking about and asking questions about Jay, her boyfriend, and his family background in terms of the World War II and their role in various scenarios in Germany. So her interest is triggered by kind of the incidents that she encounters, and then she develops into more of kind of an investigative writer, I would say. And she becomes interested in history and history writing. So eventually she goes on in the book and enrolls in a master's program history and history writing. And she takes that pathway. Whereas for me, I explained a little bit earlier, I was always interested in words and in writing, and took the academic route to become a scholar of English literature before I really committed myself to becoming a writer of literature instead. So, we have some similarities, some traits in common, but I'm not Sam for sure, and she had her own path to follow.
So, although we see much of this story through Sam's eyes, why was it important for you to include different narrative voices?
Hmm. Well, part of what I'm writing about is history and history writing, and so I felt it was very important to have a lot of voices in terms of trying to capture as much of the truth as possible about any particular story. So that's thematically important, and therefore I felt the form needed to also enact that kind of idea. So Sam is the first person narrator, but I needed to have a way to get all kinds of threads of the storylines told from a perspective that Sam wouldn't be aware of. So what I decided was that I would have, as well as the first person present tense narrative, I would have a third person narrator who presented vignettes about the other townspeople that Sam meets in her stay in Upton Bay, which is a brief stay. And the vignettes I have in italics in the book to differentiate them from the storyline that Sam is telling as the narrator. And I found that was the most effective way of providing all of that kind of background and present tense information about the residents of this town, because the first part of the book is largely about the residents of the town and how their family secrets get used or buried or distorted, and how the whole town functions on the surface, being a beautiful, attractive, touristy town that looks quiet, so to speak, but the closer you get to the people and the way this town works, the more you realize that it's certainly not what it seems on the surface. And then I also felt that it was important during the sections that Sam is telling to keep the reader kind of on their toes, in that I didn't want Sam's view to be bought 100% by the reader. I wanted there to be a sense that there were other explanations for things as Sam encountered them. She, at the beginning of the novel especially, is a relatively judgmental character. And by introducing third person explanations for some things in footnotes in the first part of the novel, I felt that was an effective way to kind of push the reader back a bit and get them to confront the fact that this is just one person's perspective, and not necessarily is it going to be 100% accurate or truthful. So that was another way that I decided would be an important addition to the form and the structure of the novel, so that the themes weren't just there in terms of the words, but also in the way the book was built.
So, from World War II to present day Upton, is it fair to say that there is a running theme of betrayal between families?
Definitely the families that Sam encounters and the reader encounters in my novel all have dramas going on within them, and some family members certainly are deceitful and betray other family members. And Sam discovers that happening in some of the family interactions that she sees and experiences while she's in Upton Bay. She encounters one of the friends of Otto's in town when she's out and about, and realizes that there is something going on with that person that the family's not acknowledging or dealing with. And Sam, for an afternoon anyhow, becomes almost a caretaker for that person. So in that way, those themes are there, and they also, I think, get Sam to think about the complexity of families, and she starts to be a little bit less judgmental, more open-minded, and more of a thoughtful person in her interactions with everyone she meets in the family and in the town proper. And then, of course, in part two, there are lots of family secrets that Sam discovers through information her mother finally shares with her about her own family background and what happened in Norway during World War II, where Sam's grandmother lived in this small town with her family. She was a young girl at that time, and the family in some ways betrays friends who happen to be Jewish people in the town, and that betrayal has a huge impact on Sam's grandmother. And also, once Sam learns about the whole history of her origins and her ancestry, it has a huge impact on her as well.
You've also incorporated real people into your character stories, and an example of this would be Moritz. How challenging was it to weave those kinds of stories into the narrative, and what kind of approach did you take to it?
Mm. Well, I did a lot of research, as you can imagine. World War II, the amount of material, archival and scholarly, and even anecdotal, is so massive. So I drilled down carefully into stories that came out of Norwegian people's experience during World War II and the Holocaust. And I found some very helpful books, a couple of which were not translated into English yet. When I was working on my novel, one of them did appear in English while I was still working on some of the drafts, so I was fortunate to be able to tap into that. Um, it was a very cautious approach I took. I didn't want to act as though I was being the voice of those historical characters or speaking for them. But the testimonies, for instance, that I came across in various archives where people had recorded interviews with survivors and people who had escaped from Norway, for instance, they provided me with a lot of details that were helpful in my construction of my fictional characters. So the fictional family that Sam's grandmother is friends with in Norway during, up to in the World War II and the Holocaust, a lot of the details about their life comes out of those materials that I was able to access and read and absorb, but not in any specific or explicit way are they taken from real life, if that makes sense. So it's a fictionalization of details and an invention of the characters, because I didn't want, as I said, I didn't want to have real named characters in the novel that I was giving voice to. It's not I didn't feel ethically right about trying to do that, write their story. But I also felt that it was important that that kind of experience that people suffered in Norway during World War II was written about in the novel in a fictional form. So it was a very careful, thoughtful approach to using the details from real life and presenting them in a fictional form that I hope was respectful of the people who actually went through these experiences.
Well, speaking of drawing in from real life, and you have mentioned that the towns are fictional, but I get a lot of Niagara on the Lake from Upton, you know?
Sure, yeah.
So, and you brought in the idea of migrant workers, which is
Mhm.
very apropos to this area as well. And the
Mhm.
contrast between them and the townspeople, how does that all fit in? How does that theme fit in with the rest of the book, do you think?
Well, I think that whole encounter that Sam has with migrant workers on one of the vineyards in the town. It triggers a lot of interest and concern in Sam about matters of social justice and equity. And while she's a judgmental person, she's also an empathetic person and someone who becomes quite concerned about one of the workers in particular that she befriends while she's in Upton Bay and has the opportunity to talk with him. So I think that the general theme of empathy and understanding um, bigotry and racism and inequity, and how one group of people who may be privileged take advantage of other groups of people who are not privileged and don't have the same rights as the privileged people do. I think that was kind of an awakening for Sam and definitely links to obviously all the experiences of the Jewish population in Norway that is written about in the second part of the novel. So it's thematically, I guess I would use the word empathy and advocacy and awareness of social injustices. Those themes run throughout the whole book. And I think the migrant storyline or thread is closely tied to part two in that way.
Well, there's another thread that runs through the book, and this is a bit of a trigger warning for our listeners. There are some themes of interpersonal violence, intimate partner violence. There's a thread of marital abuse throughout the book with various couples, even with couples that are discussed rather than direct characters. So on the outside, people like Shelley, there is an attempt to care for the spouse, though. How challenging was it to approach such a subject?
Oh, well, it's obviously very challenging to approach anything that's so sensitive and delicate. Um, but as I said earlier about needing to or wanting the novel to tackle certain themes, it seemed essential to me to make the storylines and the threads and the characters um, as real as possible so that individual incidents that are written about in the novel um, are they're not gratuitous and they are intended to provide some insight into the complexity of the relationships that are being portrayed in the book for the people who live in this town. And again, it's that kind of undercurrent that a town with no noise really has going on underneath the dark side of what might look like a successful and attractive surface lifestyle. There's certainly a lot of unhappiness and indeed suffering that occurs underneath that surface sometimes. And that's something that, in a way, is unifying because even though a lot of the people in the town of Upton Bay are very privileged and wealthy, there is indeed still a lot of unhappiness and sorrow in those lives because they're human lives and families and people are very complicated and writing about it is, I guess it's certainly challenging, but it's also perhaps the reason I write to to try to sensitively portray truth about human beings and their relationships.
So, what are you working on now? You mentioned another novel in the works. Is that the only project, or are there others?
I do have a couple of projects. The third novel, which I have drafted, is a different kind of novel again. It's probably a little more similar to my first novel than to this novel that we're chatting about today, in that it will be a first person narrator, and it'll be a lot more of an interior narrative than the outward looking social realism kind of novel that A Town with No Noise turned out to be. And I'm also starting to get some ideas for short stories again, which I haven't worked on for many, many years. So that's something I'm really interested in going back to and exploring, and narrowing down my focus again to a few pages rather than the extended timeline of a novel.
We'd love to hear you read from A Town with No Noise. Would you like to share that with our audience, please?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much for asking. And since the book is experimental and has all of these different structural approaches, it's a little hard to pick something to read that might be representative. So I think what I'll do is I will start by reading a few segments from part one, and then I'll tap into part two for a little taste of that, so that readers might be able to get a sense of what the whole thing's about and what it's like. So I'll start with from part one, Saturday. Earlier today, before Jay fell asleep beside me in the car, a transport truck full of pigs passed us on the left. And as soon as I saw beige pink flesh pressing through the holes in its metal sides, I turned my head away. Hey, Jay said, grabbing the steering wheel. Eyes on the road. I slowed down, letting the truck get far enough ahead of us that I couldn't see the animals anymore. We're carnivores, Sam, Jay said. It's an ugly fact of life. People eating meat doesn't bother me, I told him. It's how they go about getting the meat, how the animals are treated. There's no reason pigs should be put into a loud, diesel-burning truck like that and subjected to high speeds and potholes and fumes and heat. In this heat, Jay, my God. And they have to struggle to stay upright all the way to the slaughterhouse. Some get their legs broken on the way there. Can you imagine the fear, the terror they're feeling flying down the highway like that? I can now, thank you very much. Jay startles awake when the car approaches Main Street. It's as if he can smell his blood relations close by. Pop's place is just a couple of blocks from here, left at the stop sign. Sam? What? I wouldn't come here for just anyone, you know. I'm instantly irritated. Jay's been making statements like this almost every day, pressing his feelings for me, on me. He's trying too hard. His stay with me is supposed to be temporary, and I'll only do his laundry at the wash and dry around the corner for so long. But he is doing me a favor right now. I have to give him that. Tuesday. This morning, I'm off to Evil Maple Estates for a tour, one of the most popular activities people come here for. The town's promotional site makes the area sound like Tuscany instead of an agricultural zone in transition. At the winery in the retail outlet, I announce that I'm here for a private tour, but the woman tapping on her keyboard, who wears her dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, her eyeliner as dark as her black nail polish, only lifts her left hand to silence me until she's ready. I shut my eyes for 3 or 4 seconds to calm myself while the clerk continues typing. When she swings around to face me, she has a broad smile, full of perfect white teeth. Yes, and you are? Samara Johansson. One moment, please. While the guide is being sought, I pick up a brochure and I read until a loud voice startles me. Sam, I'm Jake. Let's go to the sample site, shall we? The 40-something-year-old man who greets me is friendly until I ask about seeing the actual vineyard. Sorry, off limits. We don't allow visitors. It's a tough job out there, and it'd be distracting and dangerous for the workers to have us walk through. I'm disappointed, but remind myself that I'm reporting on tourist activities, and if this is all the tourists get, well, fine. Jake chats at me, repeats the brochure content almost word for word as we look at the 3 planted rows in the demo yard. Our stock is verified by certified ampelographers, Jake boasts, and I nod even though I've never heard that word before. And it's meticulously tended, Jake says. Oh, by whom? By the staff on our team, of course. And your migrant workers, are they part of this team? Jake doesn't miss a beat. Absolutely, of course. Everyone at the estate is part of the family. We treat our workers very well. If we didn't, they wouldn't want to come back, would they? And our workers return year after year. You'll find if you check your facts that we have one of the highest retention rates in the industry. I'm not here to investigate your policies, I tell them. I'm writing an article to promote the area for tourists. Great. Well, then, is there anything else I can share with you about our winery? I tell him I'd like to see the patio and taste one of the offerings with a cheese pairing. As Jake seats me in the tented dining area outside, someone, a male voice, screams in the far field. I put on my driving glasses, but I can't detect any movement back there other than the white flags waving in the breeze. Sounds like someone is in agony, I say, but Jake is already walking away and through the doors back into the building, cell phone to his ear. The bus tour guests seated at the crowded tables, who had momentarily fallen silent at the cry, return to their conversation. This is from part 2, December. I insisted on having time off this Christmas, which I've covered at the cafe for 3 years running, to spend the holidays with my mother in Coppercliff. I've had my old room back during visits home ever since my grandmother died 5 years ago. My mother had moved Sigrid into the apartment for the last 2 years of her life. She never told me why she made that decision, even when I questioned whether it was the right thing to do, to keep Besta out of the hospital, especially when I knew they had never gotten along. My mother and I always opened our gifts before going to sleep on Christmas Eve, in the Norwegian tradition. This year, I gave my mother a velour bathrobe from Winners, lilac-scented hand lotion, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, On Beauty by Zadie Smith, both books secondhand, and a book of stamps and a box of note cards with matching envelopes. My mom's a letter writer, not an emailer. My mother gives me an Esso gift card for $50, modal fiber pajamas in periwinkle blue, a round pewter key fob engraved with my initials, an envelope with $100 cash, and a banker's box with a bright red ribbon tied around it. The box contains loose sheets of paper with notes written in royal blue ink in my mother's hand, as well as a few cassettes. What's all this? I have something to tell you. It won't be easy to hear. I learned something from my mother before she died, a terrible secret. It's been 5 years and I still can't talk about it, but the guilt of keeping it from you is getting to be too much for me. I hope you'll forgive me. I have no idea what she's talking about, but I tell her I will. Of course I'll forgive her. I try not to look at the items in the box, but to look at her while she speaks so she'll keep talking. It was shocking to learn what I did, she says. So many things about my mother's life suddenly make sense now. But this secret has completely upended my understanding of who I am. I'm not even sure I want you to know. She laughs gently. But I think I owe you the truth. We've never spoken like this, my mother and me. What did she want me to do with the contents of the box, with the terrible family secret it held, whatever that turned out to be? Sam, she said, as if reading my mind, you can do whatever you want with the information, as long as you don't get angry with me. Ma, how bad can it be? It's bad. Then she asked me to put the lid on the box and not to open it again till I get back to Toronto. You can take my old tape recorder with you too. Don't play any of the tapes here. I don't think I can stand to hear my mother telling her story a second time. I promised my mother that I will tell her when I've started to read the notes and listen to the recordings of Besta's voice, so that she won't be wondering whether I know the secret yet or not. Try not to ask me anything until you've heard all the tapes. And don't forget what you said, my mother pleads. What did I say? That you'll forgive me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Karen. Karen Smythe's newest book is A Town with No Noise, published by Palimpsest Press. Thanks again, Karen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.